Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your Front Porch Conservative. Welcome once again to Chattin on Front Porch, a live stream dedicated to allowing you, the viewer, the opportunity to hear from some very interesting guests on some topics that are affecting everybody's lives in one form or another. And the topic we're talking about tonight is Hollywood, a much debated, much uh, chewed over subject. But this tonight, I think, is going to take on a little more significance given the angle at which we're going to come at it. For the past 20 or 25 years, I think it is safe to say, regardless of political persuasion, regardless of your beliefs, regardless of anything else, there's a general consensus among the entertaining public. In other words, the folks that go to the movies, buy the comic books, buy the video games, buy the books, whatever it may be, that Hollywood is not able to produce the kind of product that it once did. And frankly, folks' reaction can be summed up in a two-word response: it sucks. But that sort of begs the question, why does Hollywood suck? Because if you stop and think about it, there's really no reason why Hollywood should not be having the kind of problems that it is, regardless of which particular area of entertainment you're talking about. I mean, after all, Tinseltown's got access to all the money in the world, almost to the envy of King Midas. They've got access to all the creative talent in terms of the actors, the actresses, the producers, the directors, the cinematographers, the screenwriters, whatever it may be. They've got access to all the latest technology. Yet for all those advantages, Hollywood cannot produce a product that people want to engage in. And that begs the question, why? And there's a few more whys while we're at it. Why is it that most people these days, again, regardless of their personal beliefs or persuasions, feel that Hollywood is shoving messaging down their throat that either A, people don't agree with, or B, they don't want to be bothered with when they go to be entertained? Yet Hollywood keeps on doing this. We've got a lot of questions and not a lot of answers, but we've got a guest tonight that can begin to answer some of that, who has experience watching all these things. Not only does he comment on pop culture in general, he also comments on the business side of Hollywood. A social media content creator in his own right, he is the host of at least 4 different shows on his own channel, which include the 6 Minute Daily, Tuesday Tirade Entertainment Talk, Friday Pre-Flight, and Late Night Culture. When he's not hosting shows on his own channel, you can find him hanging out with an assortment of internet pirates, including but not limited to folks on Yelling at Parked Cars and the Thursday Night Throwdown, hosted by Comics Division. And also, he's usually hanging out with some really good friends over at Midnight's Edge. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the incomparable Culture Casino. Culture, how you doing, brother?
I'm without words. That was an amazing introduction. I don't know how to respond to that. I feel like I feel like I should figure out how to be more witty and engaging. I don't know that I can do that, but I'm excited to be here. I really am grateful for the invitation. I've been looking forward to this all day, and the opportunity to hang out with you and speak with you backstage was joyful enough. I'm very much looking forward to today's conversation.
Oh, thank you very much, sir. No, I told Keanu this the other day when she was on, because my channel is relatively new. My shows are relatively new, but one thing I pride myself on is a great introduction. If you're going to have a guest on, make it count, baby. I mean, absolutely knock it out of the park.
I would say that you have very few contenders for that crown, my friend. You did rather well there. I appreciate it.
It comes from years of gift for gab. Trust me, being Southern has its advantages.
Truly, a rather prepared man you are. I have to say that I said this backstage, and it's my turn to lay on some flattery. You, sir, are growing rather quickly. I think I said this backstage, but I've been impressed, and I believe you're farther along in the game than I was when I was just a few months old. So well done on your part. You were very engaging indeed.
Well, I sort of, one of my heroes, given my political persuasions, you wouldn't think it. One of my heroes is the legendary Ben Bradley, the editor of the Washington Post.
Oh, wow.
And he had I love Bradley for a number of reasons, which we could sit here and I could sit here and recount stories about Bradley all day long. But one of his favorite expressions to his reporters was nose down, ass up, let's go to work. And that's how he treated the newspaper business. Like, let's go get the story, let's dig, let's do the work. And that's I'm willing to do the work. I love doing what I'm doing, because this is a load of fun.
Well, the nose to the grindstone thought process is something that's absent in modern day culture. That's funny because it feeds right into the subject matter I know you'd like to cover, but we don't have writers that put their nose to the grindstone. We don't have the writers in Hollywood or in any other aspect of life at a younger age that have actually been part of the world yet. They're not observers of the world around them. They've had little experience and little information that has not been force fed or spoon fed or bottle fed to them, I would say. And that's one of the subject matter, one of the items I say we could talk about as part of the subject matter. So it's one of the many elements. And again, it goes back to some of the things we talked about backstage. I think we live in an era where we have a lot of very unprepared people trying to inform or influence other people, and it's more than a little disturbing, to be kind.
Oh, no doubt about that. So I know we've got a limited amount of time because you're on your third live stream of the day.
Okay, yeah, this is live stream number 3. This is interview number 2 or 3. I don't know. Days run into each other. I have 3 videos I was going to do tonight, but I'm only going to do 2, and I've got another 2 live streams to go. But I don't mind. This is fantastic. We have some time. Let's not too hasty.
All right. Well, for those who are watching this and they're not familiar with you or your channel or your work, let's give, as Viva Fry might call it, let's give it the 30,000 foot overview. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up? Hobbies, interests that led you to where you are now. And I guess in the upshot, the last part of it is, how in the world did you wind up getting into the social media content creation side of this part of the internet?
Your guess is as good as mine. Let's start with that one. No, skipping back. Look, I'm a big fan of the 30,000 foot view. I like the big picture. And I like to drill down on it. I think observation is the most important thing before you make any summation. So you have to step as far back as you can and see what's happening in the world around you. Sometimes that actually requires a lot of research. But once you've done all of that, you find out that everybody's going to end up where they're supposed to be at some point in time. And whether or not they stay there, it's their own choice. But I grew up largely in the Southwest in various locales. I benefited from an education in multiple places. I started very much in an entrepreneurial spirit, as I mentioned backstage, starting my first business when I was still in high school. I managed to do that and go to school and keep another job and get ready for college. I put myself through school financially. I did get a little help here and there for the most part, but mostly it was my money, my loans, those grants and things. Did not worry terribly much about how quickly I got it done, because to me it was about getting as much out of it as I could, which is why I wasn't in great haste to do anything other than expand my life, which I did. And I'm very grateful for. My varying professions when I've worked for others have been very varied. I've done a lot of different things in technology, retail, of course. Many people do that while they're in school. I had a food service job for exactly 2 hours. And that was that shortest tenure for a job ever. I have a background through benefit of family of learning how to be a civil engineer, although I never studied to become one. I have a background in heavy machinery operation. I obviously have a construction background as well. One of the reasons why one of my other channels is a DIY channel. But primarily, I like to use my brain. So, I ended up in a lot of professions where that was, that was something that you needed. So I enjoyed that. But where I am now is here as part of several different enterprises that I work on, which I will tell you this. This started out like a hobby, like every other one of my professions. So it naturally became a business. So, but that's it. And ultimately it was the observation of things that got me where I am. I observed some severe disconnect with entertainment, what entertainment used to be and what it is, or what it had become. I didn't understand it. I knew that whatever it was, it didn't feel right. And at times it felt like I was in a sermon in a church. And I wasn't enjoying myself. There was no satisfaction in whatever it was. And this was funny because it really set in earnest. I stopped with comic books about 2013, which I had enjoyed for a long period of time. I stopped with widespread TV consumption about 2015. About the same time I stopped going to films, or I limited the number of films I went to, and I was just learning that films had been tainted in a way, no more so than, let's say, Ghostbusters and things like that. Yeah, properties that I'd rather enjoyed when I was younger, that I thought were bulletproof, that I thought if you stuck with the winning formula that was created there, like all entertainment, if you just stick with the winning formula, you're going to have a winner on your hands. It's when you vastly deviate from that you experience, failure. But and it was from that point forward, once we got to The Force Awakens in theaters, that was a real wake up call, because it felt vaguely like Star Wars. It was close enough to being A New Hope that it felt like it was a new beginning of a circular trilogy. And I just freshly come off of my great love for Battlestar Galactica, right? The reboot of the
great
television.
reboot, yeah.
And so I was like, okay, but there's something didn't hit right, and I didn't really appreciate till the end of the film, and I walked out of there with a level of excitement, but something didn't sit right. And I went with the benefit of a lot of people, a lot of family members as well. And eventually the conversation shifted to something's wrong with that. It didn't feel good. And so that really started an investigation into, does anybody else feel this way? And I had already been watching YouTube under my private account for a long period of time. And I stumbled across a few people in the landscape that were talking about, Star Wars. And some people were like, well, it was really good, but there was something, and they all kind of had that vague disconnect that I had been
that
feeling,
nagging feeling.
Yeah, that's proper. Yeah, that would be the proper way to say it. And then you get to the second film, and at that point, entertainment was entirely broken.
Yeah.
And so I found everybody in short succession, everybody that I hang out with now, whether it be Jeff at World Class Bullshitters, whether it be Gary at Nerdrotic, whether it be my buddy Ryan Cannell, Jeremy with Geeks and Gamers. I found all of these people in rapid succession. It led me to probably the coolest group of humans ever, Midnight's Edge, right? So I'm now hanging out watching these people, right? Never believing for a moment that I would be talking to them, interacting with them, or trying to be like them. And that was how I came to be here, because eventually I had to say something, because I felt like there wasn't enough being said in an area that I think I could contribute to, which at the time was a perspective like we just described. I could take a wide lens view of things, and then kind of boil it down and talk about it from the side of business, why this is not a profitable venture for all of these various reasons, I was very early on into pointing out that these things are not profitable. I was not nearly as eloquent as our good friend Valiant Renegade, so congratulations to him for
absolutely
his amazing success recently and his 5 appearances on various news programs in various ways last evening. But he and many others like myself are approaching this from that side of the equation, and it adds a level of value that makes it tangible, accessible to people, because there's dollars and cents behind this, and it's so when something doesn't perform, there's a great loss. It's not merely financial. It's even larger than that, because now you're losing out culturally and financially. And I don't really believe that the businesses that are in the business to entertain grasp exactly how compromised and corrupted their organizations are. So now my focus has shifted slightly in that not only am I pointing out what I see as wrong, I do what I was told by my grandparents to do, point out solutions, because I think you have to point towards the things that work and compare and contrast them to the things that don't. And believe me, there's a cornucopia of opportunity there. And so, like I said, that's how I ended up where I am. And you can thank Ryan for the advice about the microphone. You can thank Gary for the advice about the camera, because we all started out with base level stuff. And then you can thank Miss Martin Muses for my ability to live stream, because I was never going to be on camera. I was very, very going to try to remain as anonymous as possible. I created a VTuber avatar, a very early version of that with something called Face Rig. Okay. I used that for one video and one appearance, and after that, I was on camera because one of my other heroes, one of the other people that I consider a very good friend, one of my best friends actually, Comics Division, showed his ugly mug. Honestly.
His short, ugly mug. Let's remember, ugly mug.
Yeah. Well, his diminutive stature is overstated. Let's just put it that way.
No, that's absolutely true.
But I honestly, he did that, and I was like, you know what, let consequences come if they do someday. But I'll put this face out there, and if somebody recognizes me, so be it. So, but I then appeared on camera, and again, Miss Martin Muses, I will sing her praises forever. I really do hope she gets to hear every time I do, because otherwise I never would have been live. I never would have been doing this with you right now, or with any of the other people I get to hang out with every week. I cherish every moment I do a live stream, and I tell people all the time, there's nothing better than that level of engagement, because I'm talking to you now, but we have a chat hanging out here. We have people watching on the replay and all of that, and I consider that a very blessed moments indeed.
Oh, I agree with you completely. And for those of you that just joined the stream, my name is Brian Trippett. I'm the Front Porch Conservative. I'm here with Culture Casino. Tonight we're talking about Hollywood and the business side of Hollywood. And we were talking backstage for folks who obviously weren't there. What were you doing? Why weren't you back there with us? We were having the best party. Exactly. But I told Culture, I was like, look, I'm going to give you some topics, and I'm going to give you all the room to run. And let's get into the first one. And it's the current state of entertainment. Let me ask you for a yes or no on this. In my intro, I said there's a general consensus, regardless of beliefs, ideology, whatever, that there's something amiss in Hollywood. Am I wrong in that assessment?
No, you're 100% correct. I would say that not only are you're portraying it accurately, you're even revealing the position that's recently been taken by many of the trade magazines who are supposed to be on the other team.
Yeah. Okay. So and this one, like I said, this one's going to have multiple answers and multiple parts. I've got no doubt. Mm. What is causing Hollywood, which has access to gobs of money, gobs of technology, gobs of talent, I'm using that in serious quotations, they've got access to every conceivable advantage in the world, yet they cannot produce a product that's financially profitable to themselves, regardless of whether it's a movie studio, a television studio, a comic book company, a video game manufacturer, whoever. Why?
Well, they have a myriad of problems. And you what's really funny is you just gave all of the attributes, what should be seen as attributes that they have, which actually those are hindrances, because they have access to money. Do you realize the most creative things are usually created out of necessity, not because you're given a limited budget? You have an unlimited budget, there's no barrier. Therefore, you're free to play around in a sandbox. If you are given a constraint, if you have to live within a schedule, if you have to live within a budget, I'm sure you have in your life. I know I have. Everybody should be living within a budget. That's a serious detriment, because it thwarts the creative problem solving that should be incorporated into going about creating whatever whatever you're trying to do. I think it's incredibly. I think that's incredibly limiting not to be limited. I know that sounds odd, but it's true. So there's one of the problems. The other problem now, and probably the biggest one of all of those things that you described, It's not just the infinite money, and it's and it's not truly a dearth of creativity, although I would say that that's one of the three. It's the filmmaking by committee or television making by committee. There are too many voices. There are too many people who think they're important enough to give notes on projects. I think you're starting to see the holes in that philosophy and why it's not successful. One of the barriers, I think, and I'm going to use an example of Warner Brothers. One of the reasons why their superhero films currently are struggling so badly, especially The Flash, of course, was it had too many hands in it. It had been in development for too long.
Yeah.
You can go all the way back over a decade to when that thing was first out there in the world. I think that, you know, when you put a project in development, you should have already because when you put it in development, it means you think it's a good idea, so we're going to move forward on it. You should already have a basic outline of how this is going to go. It's a project that's in development for a couple of years. That's a problem. It means that the story wasn't good enough for you to even consider greenlighting, you know, and there wasn't enough thought process in it, you know, to have a timeline that anybody could stick to. So filmmaking by committee right now is how you end up with something like Flash. You have notes from every level of a producer. You have notes from the studio. One of the bigger problems with Warner Brothers is they didn't have an actual studio. Warner Brothers DC Studios wasn't really DC. There was really no DC Studios. There wasn't like a whole. I know this is weird. It's not like Disney where you actually have separate divisions, but there wasn't a clearly delineated, standalone, funded source of thing. And that's one of the big problems there. But even with that, you still have too many hands in the pie. Because even at Disney, even with clearly delineated lines between all of their studios, you still have too many people with input. I mean, Bob Iger should never be giving input on Star Wars, other than at the end to say, you know, you did a terrible job and I'm going to fire you.
Your lips to God's ear.
To be fair, I mean, there are a lot of people you can point a finger at, which is the whole problem, right? The reason that you cannot delineate the person that's at fault is because nobody's at the top. There's a lack of leadership, and because there's a lack of leadership, proper structure, and too many hands in the pie, who are you going to fire? You can fire everybody. Good choice, but I don't think that solves ultimately your problem. So too many hands in these projects is actually a real issue. And why are there hands there? This is the other part of it. Because everybody needs to live within these agenda-driven narratives. They have to be in a position now, or they believe this is not true. They have to be able to get their messaging into everything. It's one of the things I love about Critical Drinker, you know, because he loves that line, the message, right? And but he's not wrong. And that exists in every single property, and we're about to see it to a spectacular failure in the next film coming out, which I'm going to have to see tomorrow, called Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I could use a lot of creative names. I've come up with many, but I will use the right one this time. So, yeah.
Well, you know, you talk about you had that moment of illumination when it came to The Force Awakens. I had it, interestingly, with Crystal Skull.
Oh wow, way back then.
Yeah, well, and here's when I knew something was amiss, or I should have realized it more precisely. And here's what I'm getting at. Okay, so it had been, let's see, The Last Crusade came out, what was it, 89, I think it was, or 90? Summer of 90. Summer of 90. And no, it was summer of 89. I stand corrected. It was summer of 89. Last Crusade.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Last Crusade came out summer 89.
Yeah.
Along with that great summer of Batman, a whole bunch of great movies.
89 was one of the best movie years in history. Tom and I wax poetically about that all the time.
Yeah. So I knew that about, let's see, 89, 99, so about almost 20 years had gone by. So you figure the character of Indiana Jones is going to be a little older. The physical skill's not going to be there. But even still, Harrison Ford was tremendous. And you still had Spielberg and Lucas running the thing. Yes. But when the movie was over, I went, something's not right. It just doesn't. And this is even before all the serious messaging got into all the Hollywood stuff. But even then, I was like, there's something not right here. And that kind of get, and you mentioned something I really want to touch on, and because this is that the advantages right now are the disadvantages, and this goes to the question of Hollywood financing. And I've never quite understood this, but I definitely want to get your take on it.
Mhm.
In most other businesses, a business has a certain amount of reserve capital that they've acquired over the years. They accumulate it. They protect it. They whatever. Okay,
Mhm.
and they spend it judiciously.
Very.
Let me ask you, just like, let's say I was a filmmaker and I came to you, the studio, and I said, "Hey, I got this great idea for a movie," and you're like, "Okay, we're going to greenlight this thing."
Mhm.
Does the studio just go to this reserve of cash that's got, or is it like going out and getting a loan to finance the thing? And if that is the case, is that part of the problem with what's going on in Hollywood? It's too easy for them to get money. They're getting it financed, and the financiers are putting conditions on what these films are supposed to do.
Yes, all of the above. All of those things are part of the process, right? But what's really funny is each of these individual entities are their own corporation. So a film is a corporation. An
Okay.
individual film is a corporation. You dip into a line of credit in order to fund it, whether it be from the distribution side, production side, whatever it is. And that line of credit, up until very recently, was incredibly cheap. And right now, this is something that nobody's talking about. I tried to introduce the idea the other day. I think a lot of people with big brains are going to start talking about this, like Valiant and Pro and Midnight's Edge. But those lines of credit have just become very, very expensive. And these numbers, these budgets are not going to be feasible going forward until the interest rates come down substantially. But that's an entirely other conversation. But so when the film is formed into its own corporation, whether it be Blue Harvest or whatever it's called, right?
Okay.
The film begins its production, its actual bona fide production, not its development, but its production. You then have set it aside from the studio's money. You always try to use other people's money. So your financiers are the people that are largely on the hook. Other
Okay.
people's money is how Hollywood productions are made. The other way it used to be made creatively, and we don't do this anymore, and Tom can probably go into it in more detail, but an entity like New Line Cinema, who greenlit 3 Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films, he'd already pre-sold the films. Mr. Shea had already pre-sold the films. So the people that were freaking out in the studio just how much money was being spent on these films, he wasn't worried about it because he'd already sold the films.
Now, when you say sold the films, what does that mean exactly?
Well, he'd already placed it in other places. He already set it up for distribution elsewhere.
Oh, okay.
So when you do what he did, you've already secured your back end. You already secured your collateral for the financing, essentially. Now, this used to be done regularly by mid-level studios and studios that were trying to get to the next level, so small to mid-level studios. It didn't really fit into the larger studios as often because they could go and grab money from other financiers directly. You'll see that happening regularly. People who are given EP credits or production credits oftentimes are part of a financier, or have friends that are financiers. Regardless, there's also other alternate ways that studios do it. Occasionally, they'll put their own money in. When you're a big giant like Disney, sometimes your own money's in on the deal to a large extent. Sometimes it's not. But since each of these are their individual thing, if they fail or if they aren't fully paid out, you want to go back and get your money if you're somebody who's owed money, if you're one of these creditors folks, but or somebody that wants to put a lien on something, but all you're chasing is debt at that point. You're not chasing actual funds. So if something flops, you're chasing debt. So, but again, you don't have a lot of that in these giant studio projects anymore. They're operated on these lines of credit. So I didn't mean to confuse or
No, that's fine.
it all up.
Now, when you say they're getting more expensive, is that because of the macroeconomic situation where interest rates are being raised constantly all the time? And
yeah, that to a certain extent, that's what's going to happen with any film that was greenlit post 2019. So you're going to those films are going to have much tighter budgets. I think you've heard a lot of studio executives say, well, we got to tighten this up. Well, yeah, because you can't afford the money anymore. But the films that we're looking at now were greenlit long ago, and those budgets were already well in play, and they got their preferable terms at that time. So let's go back to Indiana Jones real quickly.
Okay.
Indiana Jones specifically, and I like to deal in the specifics, is approximately $312 to $320 million American in budget, because you have to translate the Great British pound sterling into American dollars. And at the time that it was greenlit, there was a significant difference in the exchange rate. So you have to calculate that into US dollars. They did receive some tax credits, but it's going to still bring it in at about $305 million American for that film. Now, that was its initial, this is the key word, initial production budget. And Valiant Renegade did an excellent job of explaining that very recently. You will see that on top of that, you're going to have money that's going to be spent in the future on that project. I mean, it's not reflected now, but it will be in the overall eventual production budget of the project, because you had to go back for reshoots. You had to go back for, scheduled pickups. You had to go back. You had to sustain the interest on this film, because at the point where it's not released, now you own that film. Flash suffers as much from being over bloated as it does from the interest that it's cost the studio, because they've held it back so long. So the longer they hold on to something, then you're paying interest on that LOC that you took out way back when, or however else you negotiated your finance deal. So there's a lot of other factors that are never calculated in the trades or revealed in the trades that go into how much a film actually costs. Nobody ever talks about, other than us, of course, people like us, people that pay attention,
Sure.
but they don't usually talk about the fact that the marketing budget's not included in the production budget. Anything that's, any form of advertisement for a film is costly. The Flash had 2 primetime Super Bowl ads that were run during the Super Bowl at a cost of about $7 million a piece, if I'm not mistaken. So they spent $14 million to put the Flash out there. You only had like a tiny little grind ad for Indiana Jones during the Super Bowl, if I remember, just like basically their teaser. Mm-hmm. So much less, but it still spent money that isn't included in the production budget. So by the time you get all in on a film, and I'm going to use the conservative number and not I'm not using the super duper conservative number, which my buddy Odin likes to do, Odin's movie blog, because he calculates the 2.5 number. And I'm not going to use the overly liberal number, which is 3%, 3 times budget, not 3%. I'm going to use 2.8. 2.8 puts you in the sweet spot, because you're going to get right 90% of the time if you do that. Because what will happen is you're going to have some films that don't have the bigger marketing budget, or they've dialed it back. You have some films that have gone and overshot it. So if you figure on 2.8, you're going to be right most of the time. You spend $305 million. And you use Tom's manner of figuring. So that's 305 times 3. That's $915 million. Okay, that's how much you need to make before you break even. That's because all you're calculating there is break even, because of how the splits work with the theaters. And the splits with the theaters work on the number of weeks that they're in the theater on a negotiated contract deal. Distributors that get favorable deals used to be Disney, Warner Brothers, and all the big studios. You get a less favorable deal from the mid-levels and the smaller guys. I don't know if any of this is relevant, but I'm going to just keep going.
No, go for it, dude.
So when you look at a big film like Indy, it probably is going to collect Disney will collect 55% of the revenue. The theater distribution, wherever that has to be for their lease, will be 45%. So they get 45% of the take from the box office. Sometimes those are on a scale. Disney usually works out a scale. We get more of the first weekend. We get less of the successive weekends. With Star Wars, they had negotiated the most favorable deals ever. And I'm not going to go into those because they are not confirmed. They're only talked about in the trades. Whether or not they're entirely accurate, I don't want to get into that. But I'll just say, calculate 55% domestic collection in the States. You don't get as much out of the international markets, and you really don't get very much out of China. China, you're lucky if you get your 20 to 25%. Sometimes it can be as low as 15. So in order to break even, you need a lot of extra help. You need the film to perform. So in the case of Indiana Jones, after it's all said and done, you want to get your money back. You need that film to make, I'm going to say conservatively, 900 million to hit your break even point.
Sweet Jesus.
And again, I mean, that's why the conversation around this is so interesting, and it's why our friend Valiant Renegade went so viral and ended up on all this news programming, because he pointed out the fact that we've all been discussing for a while, which is Disney this year, just Disney this year has a chance to go almost the entire calendar year of 2023 with only one win.
And that would have been
Guardians of the Galaxy.
Okay.
And it's not much of a win. It's a very small win.
No.
It's a tidy little win. But it was a win. And they lost the person that made the win. He went over to work for Warner Brothers. But at the same time, to date, and this is what's great about Valiant, they've lost nearly $900 million this year, theatrical releases alone. You can't do that. You as a studio, you cannot absorb that forever. Disney could normally absorb that because they have the theme parks. The theme parks have always been the cash cow. Well, not always, but I mean, in recent decades, they have been the cash cow.
Or to cover up a lot of sin financially. In other words, I might have a problem over here, but hey, I got the money coming in from the theme parks. I can kind of,
and it's why the company was restructured. Anytime you have a change in leadership or you have a change in direction, you will see a restructure that accompanies it, because the company can cover up a lot of sin when they restructure. And that's one of the reasons Chapek changed the structure of the company to begin with, because he wanted to roll a lot of things together that didn't make sense to roll together, but it would hide a lot of sin that was going on because of Disney Plus. Disney Plus loses somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion every quarter. It loses that much. That's a lot of red ink, right? Then you're going to add on top of that $1 billion in theatrical losses for the year. Okay, we're not done. You have now a slowing theme park attendance, which I think is being underreported, and we'll know at the end of the year based on Parks Products and Experiences performance as a division. Because believe me, I'm going to be dissecting that when the quarterly comes out this quarter. But the theme parks used to be something you could rely on to artificially support you. You can't anymore. ESPN is too expensive, and the fact that Bob Iger went out of his way recently. This is a lot of balls and strikes we're talking about, but it may be boring to some people. But
no. Go on. Go right ahead.
The reason that ESPN was broken out into the third table leg is what I call it for Disney, the third column of their structure, was because it was the only way that it would make sense to keep it. He was being pressured by an activist investor well before Nelson Peltz to do something with ESPN because it costs so much. The rights deals that they have to negotiate every several years are incredibly expensive. They're in the process right now, I believe, of renegotiating the NBA deal. That's going to cost them untold billions. I can't even think of that right now. And they're in a worse financial situation because of that with ESPN and because of what they have to do with Comcast at the beginning of next year. What's up, Mr. Shirt? But you have they're on the hook for not the $9 billion that Disney wants to pay Comcast. They're on the hook for maybe $13 to $15 billion because of Hulu's value at current, which is one of the reasons why Chapek was sandbagging Hulu all along, is because he did not want to make that more expensive than the company could afford.
Yeah.
So anyway, we went a long way from your original question.
No. Believe me, I knew going in that, I've seen you in interviews, and I say this with all the compliment in the world. Give you the room to roam. It gives me about 10 more questions I want to ask, and that's cool. But let me get to the one question that I think a lot of people are asking of Hollywood in general, regardless of whether it's Disney, Warner Brothers, name the studio, okay? And it's this, and I think I can sum this up the way most people would. Why in God's name does Hollywood continue to finance the projects the way they do, make the product that they do, keep losing money the way that they do with no conceivable end in sight. Now let me explain why I'm framing that the way I am. If I were a businessman in Hollywood, okay, thank God I'm not. I have,
Yeah,
various
bless you for
standards.
not being one. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I've got scruples and I don't like VD. But anyway, yeah, and I don't like Ezra Miller. He's not my type. But if I were a businessman in Hollywood, there is no way in the infernal regions of hell that ideology is going to outweigh my economic rationality. All right, I might give ideology a certain amount of sway for a little while, but sooner or later, ideology is not putting meat and potatoes on my plate. Okay, yet Hollywood, by most people who are looking at it, can't help itself. They're almost like a drug addict. It's like, please give me another failure. I've got to have my fix. What in God's name is the matter with these people?
Wow. Our good friend Razorfist would say Hollywood's always been a little red.
All right. I'll give you that.
Okay.
I'll give you that.
Ronald Reagan and many others, including Walt Disney, pointed that out and actually took them to task for it. So we'll start off with that. Unfortunately, now it pays to be red. And when I say that, and I think you know exactly where I'm going, I think I was baited into this. You have something called ESG. ESG makes companies do ridiculous things. And why do they do ridiculous things? Well, because there's a whole lot of investment capital tied up in giant funds, pension funds, retirement funds, 401ks that are controlled by entities that have priorities that are antithetical to profit at times. They want a certain level of power and control and the ability to shift society. So, boiling it down to just Hollywood, you can control Hollywood or any Fortune 500 company with strings on. Well, we're gonna make sure that this bank doesn't loan you this money unless you do this. How do we do this? Well, we want you to adhere to this very strict environmental, social governance series of bullet points, and if you do not, we'll make things less favorable to you for you to conduct business. If you do, even if it's at your own peril, we'll make sure you have access to ready cash. We'll make sure everything goes better. We'll make sure we invest even more in your company to outweigh what is antithetical to profit that you're enforcing. Hollywood's easy to manipulate that way. All these giant entertainment companies are easy to manipulate that way because, again, we talked about how you go about all these weird things you have to do to get money to make a film. Well, you just outlined exactly the whole problem. Now that money, those purse strings are controlled by banks that are owned by the same pension funds. Mm-hmm. And they have a lot of sway. Well, how does that happen? That's the next logical question. Okay. Well, because they have so much sway, because they have so much capital invested, they control board position seats, which means they control the C-suite, which means that from top down, your company gets corrupted with this stuff, which is why you end up with a lot of unnecessary things in your HR department, like DEI. It's how you end up with a re-education program for your current employees, whether it's named Reimagine Tomorrow or New Future or New Direction or any of these other things that I've heard from these other studios. They're all the same thing. And so that's how you go about doing it. And then it's just the same. It's the same thing that you always see with other companies that are corrupted out of a sure sense of profit or easy profit, which has happened across the media landscape. You bring in people that are unqualified or have no history or ability and put them in charge of things that they have no business being in charge of. You also have a bunch of people hiring young people that meet all this criteria that have been educated in a way that they're activists. They're no longer employees. They come in and they become activists. So that actually makes its way all the way down to reader positions. If you don't know what a reader is a person that looks at a script first before he hands it to his boss to say, "Hey, we should make this." Mm-hmm. And his boss is going to look at it and say, "You know what? You're younger than me. You're hipper than me. and this, if this fits the bill, I'm going to take this, read it, and push it up the chain. That's what a reader is. So if you've corrupted every single level from the top down and from the bottom up, that's your simple answer. And believe it or not, that's the simplest answer. I could go on, but it's
I was trying to bait you into it, but as far as I'm concerned,
Mhm.
when you're here, I have very few rules on my live streams, but as far as I'm concerned, with this kind of stuff, talk to me like I'm your crazy Aunt Ethel and I don't know anything, which is not possibly too far from the truth in certain subjects. So roll with it.
Well informed, my friend.
Well, for those of you who are joining this live stream, my name is Brian Trippett. I'm the Front Porch Conservative. I'm talking with Culture Casino, a social media content creator and a very astute observer of the business side of Hollywood. And we're talking about why the entertainment industry is how it is right now. So let's just shift gears ever so slightly.
Sure.
And I want to get into something, and I want to get your take on this debate. And this is sort of inside what commonly is called the fellowship. There are two wings to this, and they're represented by two equally capable individuals. On one side, you have Gary Beekler, aka Nerdrotic.
Yep.
For those of you who are watching this, maybe you've never checked out his channel, you need to do it. Talk about somebody with a just as astute an observational nose for pop culture. Check out Nerdrotic. Gary would make the argument that when it comes to existing Hollywood, existing old studios, existing franchises, okay, we need to try to stay in this fight, put the pressure on as much as we possibly can to force these things to change back to what they were, or at least make them better than they are right now.
Sure.
On the other side of that argument, you have Eric July, aka Young Ripa, who is basically like, F it, burn it down, let them go under. If they're stupid enough to do this to themselves, they get what they deserve.
Yeah.
Maybe let me phrase the question this way. Is the current structure of Hollywood, the studio systems, or the entertainment structure as it's currently constituted, is it redeemable financially and or otherwise at this point? Or in your estimation, are you kind of on Eric July's side of this argument, like, screw it, it's done, let's start creating new stuff?
Yes. I think they're both right. I know that's a cop-out answer, but I'll tell you why.
No, I can see where you come down on that.
Yeah, I'll tell you why. The studios can be recovered. It's not that hard. One of the biggest factors contributing to the slow death of any corporation is the bloat. You have a lot of people in places they don't need to be. You have a lot of people that have jobs because nobody else wants to do them. And they may not be significant, they may not be all that important, but they work on a task that nobody else wants to take on. So you continue to grow a company in a way again, I love using the word antithetical. It's antithetical to profit. You can't be profitable if you're over bloated. It's one of the reasons why I appreciate consolidation, because I think when you start to see the consolidation happening, you are forced to remove redundancy. And all of these studios have far too many redundancies. I mentioned, this is the funniest thing, I mentioned that Warner Brothers, I'm going to use them as an example of the studio. Warner Brothers can bounce back. And believe me, Zaslav was on the right track to make it happen. The problem is he's being kind of thwarted here and there, and the CNN debacle was not something that helped his argument very much. But he was on the right track. Start eliminating the redundancies. Warner Brothers doesn't suffer from they have a lot of nameplates, but they don't really necessarily have a whole lot of real actual separations in their studios. That's a barrier to doing things a little easier, but at the same time, it should make it easier to remove redundancy, which they kind of sort of did, but still haven't actually done fully. The reason Jason Kilar came in was he was a headhunter. If you knew anything about his past, this is the guy before Zaslav. AT&T brought him in to just clean house, and he didn't do it. And he didn't do it because he was being ruled by two masters, AT&T, who was trying to, thumb their nose at the ESG stuff. And then, of course, the financing mechanism that was controlling the studio that was outside of AT&T. And that's how you ended up with what we had at Warner Brothers, and you ended up with Zaslav, the Reverse Morris Trust spinoff. So that is an example of that's a studio you could save with the right hand at the tiller. I still think Zaslav's the right hand at the tiller. I just don't know if he's going to be able to hang in there long enough to do it, or if he's going to be pressured to sell off pieces of the studio. I think that's actually a greater risk than you would think. I mean, it's parting with little pieces here and there. I think Paramount's going to be forced into that position as well. But then I agree with Eric July. If a company's not willing to change, revert, go in a positive direction, try to find a way back to profit and sensibility and get back in touch with their audience, which none of these studios seem to be right now, then let them die. And that's why I said both, because, you're going to have some that elect to change and some that won't. And what's sad is I think Disney's going to be the last giant oil tanker to turn away from the land that they're heading towards.
Yeah.
And it's going to be far too late. It takes, if you're traveling at, 12 knots in a super tanker and you don't start to slow that boat down past 20 miles out, you are going to hit land.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid that Disney is that one oil tanker that's 18 miles from shore and still hasn't taken their hand off the throttle.
Yeah, especially when you've got a captain that is, telling the engine room full speed ahead and don't slow anything down doing it. But
yeah,
let me talking about guys like Eric July, and we mentioned the critical drinker a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
And I want to frame this question as it relates to, I'll call it old Hollywood. You could call it current Hollywood.
Sure.
Let me ask you a question. And I've heard this posited by these gentlemen. I've heard it posited by Nick Rekieta and others. How much of a threat is social media? And by that, I mean what we're doing right now, what the drinker does with his live streams, or Gary, or anybody else. How much of a threat is social media and individual content creators to the structure of Hollywood? Because, and I guess here's how I'm framing this. Here you've got Hollywood that has all these hoops they've got to jump through and all this money they've got to spend before they ever even create a product. Whereas the social media content creator can take a certain amount of physical equipment, sit down in front of it, what we're doing right now, and we can be engaging in basically talk show equivalent work with, like, I mean, I jokingly call what I do here the tin can and string operation. I got mine is surplus Ukrainian equipment that I bought from a guy named Zelensky, but it works. And I stole that one from the late G. Gordon Liddy. I'll explain that later sometime. But how big of a threat is social media content creators to current Hollywood?
One word: existential.
Why?
Okay, so the influence that we have individually may not be great, but we have something they don't have, which you actually referred to, the group of us. It's the fellowship, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some people have used other words for it, but we collectively get together and have conversations. We cross-pollinate. We bring varied audiences. We have varied experiences. It's why people follow us, right? It's like, I've had that life experience. I identify with that person. Well, when we start to cross-pollinate, everybody finds more people. And we become a very large and very influential army, so much so that we know for a fact that Gary has people from Hollywood watching him. Midnight's Edge has a lot of people from Hollywood watching them. People follow a lot of these bigger entities, and then they
hang on.
people like me.
When you say people in Hollywood, I mean, how high up the food chain are we talking? Are we talking about guys working on the lot? Or are we talking producers, directors, money people, etc.? Without giving anything away, I understand privacy.
Humble brag. I know production people, production assistants, and things like that are watching me, and I know that they're watching others. I have one of them in my audience on the regular. I have, of course, I have friends of mine who are watching,
sure.
But that's different. But that's just the benefit of people that I grew up with. But I also have very clear knowledge that you have some people that are, if not watching directly, they're using their executive assistants to monitor what's going on. It's one of the reasons why you get clapbacks, like when they went after Ryan Cannell, Geeks and Gamers, and Gary all at the same time. They created an entity called Rewriting Ripley with a social media presence to try to have their own version of a fight back. It didn't work out well because they were discovered rather quickly for what they were and who they were backed by and their connections to a particular company, which would be Disney. But I can leave that where it is. You can do your own research for that one. But I have to tell you, I've never seen anything dealt with more deftly and rapidly than I am with how we immediately pushed back against that baloney narrative that they were doing. So, and it's funny that they picked Ripley, right? Because Ripley's like one of our heroes from a wonderful pop culture franchise, and I mean, it was one of the examples that we always used as like, this is a strong female character. We've never not had them. One of the most powerful women in Hollywood for a very long period of time was Lucille Ball. She's more powerful than her husband. She made him look like a fool, and she was just one of many. I mean, Tom and I have gone on a laundry list of naming all of the very powerful, influential women in Hollywood. And believe it or not, it's very conservative for the most part. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But when you get to the characters have always been there. And one of my favorite comedians was always Carol Burnett. I loved Lucille Ball. I mean, we can go on and talk about the amazing actresses that made Hollywood. I mean, of course, a lot of people say Betty White, and you'll talk about Angela Lansbury and all these other wonderful ones. But they've always played wonderful female characters that, they really didn't take any guff. And I grew up with women who took no guff. My grandma's, let me tell you, that you could be in some trouble. So it's not like there was ever an absence of strong women. And and yet you end up with these ideas that, well, we've always had this dearth of strong women. No, you really haven't.
No, absolutely.
And again, that's where that's where the irony of that comes in, I guess. And I went off on another tangent. You got to tell me to shut up.
No, dude. Like I say, I'm going to give you all the room to run you want.
Right.
But I mean, this is something I've been thinking about for a while, because and I guess this sort of leads into where I'm going next.
Sure.
The current strikes in Hollywood among the various things. Now, correct me where I'm wrong, but as I understand it right now, the Screenwriters Guild is on strike. Is that strike still ongoing?
Oh, yeah, the Writers Guild. The Writers Guild is the WGA is on strike. You're about to go into the Screen Actors Guild.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you next. The Screen Actors Guild is about to go on strike come midnight Friday.
Yeah,
correct?
Indeed. Yeah, the 30th is the very last day, and then on the 1st of July, they're done. And believe it or not, they have a very hard position, as the Writers Guild does. They are taking a very strong line. They have very big names telling them, we are not going to bend here.
Okay, now, did I understand you say earlier today on your 6-minute that the Directors Guild has already they have so basically we're in a position where no one's writing any content and no one's going to be acting any content absent an intervention in the next 48 hours. Okay, so let's go back to the question I was asking about the individual content creator.
Yeah.
I've heard Nick Rekieta say this on more than one occasion. If ever there was a time for individuals to strike out and start being creative, it's now, because, and not even necessarily, and he said this even before there was a question of whether there's going to be a strike in any particular union, but he made the observation that now is the time to do it. The technology and the internet are the great equalizers. You don't need the Hollywood money. You don't need the Hollywood everything else. You can create content on your own. Now, let me ask you a question. There are a couple of them as it relates to the strike and or strikes, plural.
Yeah.
How long first of all, what are they striking over? Let's just start from there.
Well, for a very long period of time, the writers specifically have been underpaid. There's no argument to be made there. I agree with a lot of their complaints. I don't agree with a lot of their demands, but I agree that their complaints are valid. They've been underpaid and underappreciated for a long period of time. And appreciation is only what you negotiate. It's called money. Okay. So we'll put it there. They're very underpaid. Why are they underpaid? Well, because the studios have always been very unfair and ruthless when it comes to how they pay people for residuals and things like that, right? And they've always downplayed the value of, let's say, video cassettes. Video cassettes was where we first found ourselves in one of these situations where people were being underpaid, because the value of the film, that's quantitative. You could actually, pick up a calculator and say, okay, this is how much your check is, and if we release it again, I'll write you another check for what it made then. Okay, and so that was easy. Well, and you had, unfortunately, a secondary market that didn't exist before. Right. So you had replay on TV, which I could write you a check for. You had replay in theaters, I could write you a check for. You could have replay on a cable channel, I could write you a check for that. But when you got to videotapes, we weren't writing checks. And so we had a disagreement, and we had to go about getting that resolved. I understand. You have a union. The union says we're going to get paid. They were underpaid because the sales were underrepresented, because they always have been. And you weren't able to track exactly in a rental store how many times that film got rented out and viewed elsewhere. You weren't paid those residuals on, how many times a video cassette came out of a video store or off of Netflix when we got to CDs and DVDs and things like that. Now we're at a different position. We're even worse off for them, because streaming is not being compensated, and there is zero transparency. None. They don't know how many times their shows are being viewed. They don't know to what extent their work is being appreciated. It's also another reason why, if something doesn't perform, we know. How do we know? Well, now they're getting rid of it. You're watching Paramount, Disney, Warner Brothers write down things that didn't perform. Nobody watched. But the things that they didn't write down, obviously people are watching.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't know how many. So how are you going to get paid on something you don't know how many people are watching?
Yeah, I can see.
And if you're a studio, if you own a streaming service, I don't care who you are, Netflix, Apple, whatever. Apple's not a studio, and neither is Amazon, so we'll set that aside. But
praise God.
Let me tell you, how do you know?
Yeah,
you don't, because there's no transparency. Guess who likes that? The studios, because they don't want to pay anymore. These things are losing tons of money anyway. These walled garden ideas, which were harebrained to begin with, and I said it from the very beginning, those were a loser. That's a lose-lose proposition, and it strips away 4 other opportunities at revenue. Okay. Because you're not reselling your film multiple times. You're not reselling your television show multiple times. You're not passing it over down to TBS. You're not passing it down over to Netflix. You're not passing it down the line. You're not going to benefit from the CD and DVD sales as much, because now you have a streaming service. So people could wait. I would argue that, if you want to see something, you go see it in a theater, but people could wait to consume it until it came out on streaming. And then how do you know that anybody watched it? How do you know the billions of people didn't watch it? You don't know. Yeah. And so that's the argument for both the Screen Actors and the Writers Guild. And it was the argument for the Directors Guild. But I'm going to say this, and I've said this, and I don't think people understand. Directors Guild, they've always taken a really fast, easy settlement. They've always tried to do that so that every time they negotiate, they get more and more of what they want. And they're also almost always the best compensated of the groups, they because of how the contracts are negotiated for them. And they don't rely nearly as much on the way the residual structure works for other production people. Let's just put it that way.
Let me ask you this. Yeah. How long could these strike? I mean, from what I understand, just listening to the folks I do, you and others, on, let's say, the Writers Guild, how dug in are they? How long could these strikes go on?
If they get about 80% of what they're asking for, absent the ridiculous things they're asking for, it could end sooner. Will they? No. First of all, it's not in the studios. This is going to sound weird because they're going to have no content, but it's in the studio's best interest right now for them to not be in.
It's a siege.
Because you're delaying. You're delaying having to write checks, and right now that's okay. They still have material to release. They can gin up the machine when they need to. Yeah, it'll be very much like what we experienced right out of the pandemic, where we had a dearth of material available, but it'll eventually gin back up to full speed. They also have these unique things called on the television side, you have reality shows.
Sure.
You also have other countries producing material. So it's not like you're, out of luck. So it just benefits them financially. So the question being, how long can they go on? Well, studios can go on for a while. They don't care. And there are a lot of people on the writers' side decided long ago that this would probably last through summer. I think they're right. And I've heard some other people. Yeah, I've heard some other people suggest we might be September, October, November, potentially December. It could go on that long. Will it? Unlikely. The war chest was substantial, but not
infinite.
Not insurmountable for the studios to wait out for sure.
Okay.
But again, a lot of these people put their own money aside. What I suspect is the screen actors are going to get what they want, and the last people to the table will be the WGA. But we're not even done then, and this is a conversation that I think people are skipping over. You still have the Teamsters, two varying forms of Teamsters unions that still have to be negotiated with, that represents completely other entities, electrics and all the other sides of things. So,
oh wow.
Yeah, IATSE is going to be coming to the table again. Again, we've seen this before. I've talked about it on videos and live streams. We've seen this before. This is going to be more like 08 than it is like the last one.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
And again, just at a time when Hollywood doesn't need this. I mean, when Steven Spielberg is walking up to Tom Cruise at some awards ceremony, you saved Hollywood's ass. And now you're just barely, and just starting to come out of it. Now you're about to have 2, 3, 4 of the major unions in Hollywood that are necessary to create content all be like, screw you, we're going to sit on our hands and do nothing. And it's like, man, if ever there was a worse time for it to happen, it's now. And it's just
truly. And again, I mean, it could end tomorrow. I mean, we've heard from the screen actors that, we've had productive talks, right? And as much as you want to listen to Fran Drescher talk, which I don't anymore, there was a limited period of time that I was okay with The Nanny. But I have to tell you that I don't anticipate that it's anywhere close as is being indicated in the public. I think there's a lot of hurdles to get over, and I think they're going to have to negotiate even more on the likeness items because of the AI in the future. But that's a whole other conversation. But this could go on for a while. And reflecting back on the previous question, why I think it's existential, because I'm seeing better material coming out of every kind of material coming out of YouTube. Yeah. Every whether it be YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, even YouTube, on exactly. Yeah. And I mean, there are many different locations to go and consume things. Heck, people put up whole series and shows that they create on Vimeo and then publish them through Roku or other places, because you can self-publish now, and then you can collect revenue from ads that run on your content. It's remarkable what can be done right now by an individual with a jinky camera, a jinky microphone, and everything else. I don't need all of the Hollywood stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I look at it and I go, this is true. So when you hear Ricada say that, when you hear Eric say that, when you hear Gary say that, when you hear Comics say that, when you hear Midnight's Edge say that, they're not blowing smoke. They're right. And that's another reason why studios, entertainment companies, they're paying attention to what's happening on YouTube. And that's look, you just watched a bunch of YouTube creators end up with Friday Night at Freddy's guest spots or little cameos in that, and you're seeing more and more folks make that jump. Now, probably the worst thing to ever happen to a YouTuber is what happened to Lily Singh, a content creator, I should say, because she went from being, funny to a niche audience of her followers to not funny on national television.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but that was a really disappointing move. Her YouTube audience didn't translate to network television. Just didn't. It's not going to. Sure. And that's the other thing. Once you move people here, because the establishment's been failing so hard and dropping trust and everything else, sure. Once you lose people to YouTube and to Rumble and all these lovely platforms we have, they're gone. It's just like with the Bud Light, right? Just like with AB InBev. Yeah. Those people aren't going to come back. They've experienced the pure joy of live entertainment, or some of the skits, the stuff that we do occasionally on Comics Division, where we do special shows from time to time. Well, let me point at something great. One of my buddies, Quarter Black Garrett, and he's got a new show called Normal World with the other funny guy. I can't remember his name right now.
Dave Landau.
Yeah. Yeah, it was getting there. I got to get the hamster wheel going, but yeah, I mean, and they're genius, right? And I fully anticipate, to be fair, and based on the performance of the Wet Spot with Chrissy Mayer and everybody else, I truly believe that you're going to see more and more people become modern Joe Rogans and do their own thing. And then from there, they can do a skit show. They can do, their own version of Saturday Night Live. I think we're not that far away. In fact, if I were able to set up my own sound stages now, which I'm still several years from being able to do, I'd be doing that. I'd be bringing people in to do a skit show, to do a Saturday Night Live thing, because there's so much room for it. There's so much room for it.
Yeah, I saw a clip today on Twitter of Dana Carvey and David Spade. And I think Carvey was a guest on David Spade's podcast. And those guys in 50 seconds did more funny than Saturday Night Live can do in a half an hour.
Oh, indeed.
Because they're that talented. They played off each other that well. And there wasn't any subject. They got on the subject of, oh, dare I use this word on YouTube, COVID and Dr. Fauci. But there's Carvey, doing a Fauci impersonation, having a blast doing it. Spade's over on the other side of the table laughing his butt off. Yeah. And, and I thought, this entertainment can't do this anymore. But yeah, which gets to the last topic of the night. And before we get to it, quick commercial for both of us. My name is Brian Trippett. I'm the Front Porch Conservative. Welcome to Chattin on the Porch. My guest is the inestimable Culture Casino. Wow. He has a YouTube channel. I have a YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed to both of us, what's the matter with you? For heaven's sake, give us a sub. Give us a shot at a sub. Please. We're working hard here, man. We're putting in the work. Let's get to everybody's favorite, well-deserved whipping boy these days.
Oh.
Disney.
Okay, we can do that.
Now, let me set this up. I am 51 years old. My sister is a little older than I am, which means she was a kid in the 60s and 50s, 60s, 70s. I was a kid in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. I turned 18 1990. Okay. My sister, I could make a pretty good argument, was a kid during the golden age of Disney. And even though I wasn't there for the golden age of Disney, I was there when it was still good. And I'm not trying to be, nostalgic rose-colored glasses here, but my point is this. If you told your parents, hey, Mom, I want to go see this movie at the theater, can you give me, $10 for the ticket and the popcorn and the soda? Oh, what movie is it? Oh, it's the Disney movie named fill in the blank.
Whatever it is.
Your parents never had to worry about it because Disney was the gold standard.
Yes.
When it came to, it didn't matter if it was animated film, live action, it didn't matter what it was. Disney was the gold standard. Parents didn't have to worry about, I wonder what my kid's going to come back from the theater and say, Mom, what the dildo? They weren't going to have to ask these. Yeah, exactly. They never did ask. You could be watching the wide world of Disney, I think on NBC or ABC, depending on what decade you're talking about. Yeah. And you're sitting around with your kids. You didn't have to worry about, because Disney was family entertainment.
Yep.
When did that? And now let me also back it up one more step. Michael Eisner comes in the early 80s, I think it was, took over as the chairman, the CEO of Disney.
He had to.
Okay, and had to because, his predecessor. Yeah. But he sort of, I don't want to say this, modernized it out a little bit. You had Touchstone Pictures, but Disney was still Disney. So here's my starter question for our well-deserved whipping boy.
Okay.
When did Disney start to go wrong?
Believe it or not, Disney's always had little patches of that, and it's always happened. There's always been a great expansion, a great era, followed by a very short era of not so great. When you refer to Eisner coming in, that was after Miller did a very poor job of operating the company for a while, and he was a He was a family member that had been put in a position he never should have been. And we can get into that in an entirely other stream, because the history of Disney is fascinating to me. My family's been, to whatever extent, involved in Disney since very early on. My mother, I'm not even going to get into it. So we'll visit upon that, maybe another interview. But Disney specifically has always had that, where you will have an era, a small era, where it'll be downturn. We were headed into that downturn prior to Iger leaving the first time. Yeah. And he had actually overstayed his welcome. Technically, he should have been out long before he was. He was put in a position of great authority as being the chairman and the CEO simultaneously, which he should not have been. That was another major problem. But this is a man who had so many conflicts of interest with the Disney company that it was palpable. He was involved with Apple on their board. At the same time, he was Disney's chairman. At the same time, both entities were developing their own streaming services. I don't want to get into all of the things that were going on in the background there, but they were not just a little bit shady. Okay. But he had already started the downturn there, because he was positioning himself for his exit, and his exit was going to include a run at the presidency. He's a political animal. He's always has been. He's never actually been a creative. He doesn't understand the process. He does understand management and acquisition, clearly, but he's never actually been a creative. The guy was as bright as a weatherman needs to be. I'm going to take an educated guess at the weather. That's what he is. That's what he was. And most people, when I say that, don't realize the guy was a friggin' weatherman, from a local, regional, and then a national level, and moved his way up the company, through the business side of the equation, and then became an administrator of sorts. And that was how he ended up where he was. He really wasn't, and never was. Aunt Willow, his wife, Willow Bay, also a news personality. So not a whole lot of depth there, because it doesn't require that much. But he was really good at acquiring things. He saw things that were valuable, and he decided, okay, this financially is worth it. I can project forward what this will be. If it exists and stays the way it is, it has the opportunity to grow. But the problem is, once you bring something like that in, and Paul Chatto, who's a genius, right?
I agree.
Former TV executive, I identified this, and it's something that I've seen my entire life. Third generation ownership. But what is that really? Well, it's a change in culture. So when Disney acquired something, they changed the culture of the thing that they got. Maybe not all at once, maybe not right away, but they changed the culture.
Marvel.
And so as you started to lose the smartest people in the building at Disney, you started to lose that at all of the studios, everything that they had acquired, whether it be Pixar, where they lost their spiritual leader in John Lasseter. But at the same time, most people don't realize Lasseter was riding herd over Walt Disney Animation. So that was a double blow. That's why their animation products suck. You lost the creative center of Lucasfilm when you passed on George's scripts and everything else, and didn't encourage his participation in Star Wars going forward. Instead, you turned it over to an ideologue in Kathleen Kennedy and all of her little lapdogs and sycophants, I like to refer to them as. And so that went downhill, because that culture of, feminist movement, fourth wave feminist, I would say, or probably possibly even fifth wave feminist now, if you want to classify it as such. That was Kathleen Kennedy's change in the culture there. So at each of these things, the culture changed. Disney stepped away from its more adult brands and just used them as nameplates. So you mentioned Eisner brought into the equation Hollywood Pictures and Touchstone, and a third one I don't even remember. But anyway, they had three other nameplates they could put more adult oriented content under. It was still somewhat family, believe it or not, but it was it didn't have nearly the bad words or the superfluous nudity and things like that you would find in other adult programming. But Pretty Woman was a pretty popular film.
Yeah.
So but they've always gone through these lulls, and I think Iger actually instituted the one that we're in now. So it made zero sense to bring the man back into the equation after having Chapek in a place where he could really right the ship, and you could replace him with somebody who would move the company forward. So, and this is exactly what happened to Eisner. When he lost Wells, he lost his Roy Disney. This is 100% right. So Disney's always operated best, and this is something I've talked about, and I think Mr. Redshirt's 100% right. You have always operated best when you have a business mind and a creative mind. The creative mind's always been the CEO. You have Walt to Roy, you had Wells to Eisner, you had, originally Iger had, I can't remember who it was, but he did have a creative mind that was there with him, and he was more of the business mind, which is a role reversal. But he's never been particularly creative, and as he's lost people that were, and people with more flexible minds than him, he's just suffered. But the culture changed at everything that he had acquired, things that were valuable. I mean, you saw the Power Rangers. Power Rangers come in, they get destroyed, they go out for way less money. And that's when the collapse started to happen at Disney. And to get back to the original thing, Disney's done until they get rid of Iger and every single person he brought in the building. And I don't see a positive side of the equation for them because they're incapable of change. He is so determined, stubborn, you pick your adjective, to stick to this DEI equation, to this very neo-Marxist approach to entertainment, that entertainment is a misnomer. It's beyond proselytizing at this point. It is, and it's not even preaching. I can't even put it into terms other than what you get in these films is a form of indoctrination. It is.
Yeah, that's the word I was just thinking about.
Yeah, it's literally trying to push your social views, your social conditioning on others. And that's really what everything Disney has become, whether it be sports at their ESPN network, which is why they've lost tremendous viewership. It's why people abandoned him on cable and didn't replace them elsewhere, digitally or otherwise. You're watching that happen with their films. You suggested used to go to the gold standard of films. You had no arguments with your parents about whether or not you should be allowed to see said film, right? Even though Something Wicked This Way Comes was a Disney release, which I still think is one of the greatest films ever made. But you didn't. There were no quibbles. There were no qualms that were introduced into the discussion when you said, "I'm going to go see this Disney movie."
Yeah,
right? And you can't do that now. Nobody trusts Disney. You've lost entire family units. You've lost a generation. And
I'll argue generations.
Well, and exactly. And that's what happens, right? Generationally, you have generational properties. Star Wars, generational property. Indiana Jones, generational property. And there are many more we could certainly talk about. I mean, Paramount has their own they've destroyed with Star Trek, but we'll set all that aside, any genre thing. But man, don't even get me started on engineering because I know a lot of those folks.
Yeah.
But back to it just real quick.
Sure.
But you've lost not just one generation. The minute you use the one generation, you lose successive generations.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what's been happening to them. And now you're watching Universal eat their lunch with their two animation brands, and very deservedly so, because they are not wearing you out with messaging.
Yeah.
Is there a little there? Sure. But I mean, there was some there with Avatar, and I can ignore the Fern Gully, overtones. I don't.
Let me ask you one last question. We'll put a wrap on it with this.
You bet.
Given that Disney is looking at a ticking clock, that they're going to have to pay Comcast probably anywhere from $13 to $15 billion, and given Valiant Renegade's estimate, and I have no reason to dispute him on this, that Disney has lost upwards of $1 billion in terms of its films over the past 12 months.
Yes.
You take those two things, you take declining revenue from the parks, and I don't think this question is apocalyptic, nor is it unfair to ask, how close is Disney to not existing as we have known it in American culture in the past 100 years? Could they go under?
No. I mean, oh gosh, I don't want to get into the just sheer amount of crazy they are.
No, I understand.
Yeah, most people don't realize just exactly what their holdings are. I mean, whether they be vertically integrated or spread out in places people don't realize, their real estate holdings alone will keep them afloat for a very long period of time.
Okay,
but that's really not the question. They don't have a lot of cash on hand. I mean, that's the other.
I've heard that said.
That's the other part of this discussion. They don't have easy access to the kinds of funds that you would hope that an entity that size would. They are going to have a very hard time maintaining their level of their rating currently. And again, you can go and look that up if you want to. There's places to do that. But as they exist today was your question. I think there's a real possibility. I think you are in a position where you're going to have to start to shed things, because if their stock price continues to go down and there's a shift in their P&E and their rating goes down. I mean, if you check out Fitch or any of those things, I mean, you can, like I said, you certainly can look that up. They have very hard times ahead. Now, what's worse is, and I know they're trying to say that we're not really in a bad recession or any of those other hard economic times. Go look at how much your grocery basket costs and then tell me we're not in big trouble. Yeah. Disney doesn't inspire anybody to attend their theme parks, attend their films or anything else, or even consume their streaming service. Yeah, they're gonna have to start shedding things. What exactly? Hard to say. Whatever they can get away with, like selling somebody. To be fair, I mean, hard to find a lot of value in what Star Wars was worth versus what it's worth now. Hard to find a lot of value in what Marvel was worth versus what it's worth now. You know,
I agree.
And so, I mean, it's the same problem that every studio has now over the course of the last few years, because they've allowed themselves to be governed by neo-Marxism. I know that that's a hard concept for a lot of people to get, but you know, that's really the downfall here. ESG is neo-Marxism. I mean, we're having something akin to the Chinese Cultural Revolution in this country right now, but that's neither here nor there.
Oh, absolutely.
But do I believe that Disney could be fundamentally changed? Yes. Do I think we'll actually see that in the next few years? Well, absent massive changes, yes. I think you have to. I think that unless the board is wholesale shifted, and I mean that wholesale shifted, to put in place people who are not driven by ideology, Disney will look very different in the near future.
Cool. Well, I know that you've got other live streams to get to, and you have been extraordinarily gracious with your time. Again, for folks who maybe are catching the tail end of this, my name's Brian Trippett. I'm the Front Porch Conservative. This is Culture Casino. We've been talking about the state of things in Hollywood. And brother, I mean, give your coordinates. Where can people find you on social media? Where can they plug into what you're doing?
I am the easiest person to find. If you see this name down here, you can find me everywhere at that. Honestly, it's Culture Casino. If you look down at the @ symbol at the bottom there, it says @Culture Casino. You can likely find me at every single one of these locations. And I'm very, very grateful I was able to pull that off. And pretty soon you'll be able to find me elsewhere, because I think I really am going to try to get Kick launched next week. So that'll be bananas. I can't believe I'll be streaming to 5 places at once.
My word. That's
That
is
madness.
I mean, yeah, I know. Isn't it wonderful? I mean, right now we're on YouTube, we're on Rumble, we're on Twitter. And if I could figure out how to make Getter, I do the integration to get Getter to do, I'd be streaming on there. Yeah, I really would. Yeah. But anyway, folks, thank you for stopping by. Culture, hang on for a second. We'll say some proper goodbyes. Everybody, thank you very much for stopping by, chatting on the Front Porch. We'll be back next week with another guest. If, on the other hand, the 4th of July allows the people are traveling, we'll be doing it the week after. So thank you very much, everybody, for stopping by. Have a good night.
Take it easy.